Chapter 1. The Little Prince was smashed by a book. You are listening at famvetv.info. Edited by Yumaman. When Noah was soaking his fishtail in the bathtub, he was inexplicably hit on the head by a book that had appeared out of thin air. What just happened was so bizarre that he was left stunned. After opening the book, he almost fainted after reading it for 2 minutes. The story of the book was bloody and terrifying. Its protagonists were him and Yuuzhan, the youngest major general of the empire, but the story wasn't a good one. In the book, he was ruthless, gloomy, and cold. In order to seize the throne, he hadn't hesitated to seduce Yuuzhan, who held great power. But after his success, he picked up his pants and refused to recognize people. He calculated Yuuzhan. In the end, he was pulled down from the throne by the vengeful Yuuzhan, locked in a small black room, and suffered all kinds of forced plays. This really wasn't like a serious book. The plot itself could only be found by reading between the lines. As for the story itself, sex scene, the story was full of sex scenes. Noah felt he had extraordinary perseverance by summing up the plot in many, noises instead of getting angry. But the case was that, after reading the book, he still suffered great physical and mental damage. After closing his eyes and squinting for a while, he even had several nightmares, all of them relating to Yuuzhan. He was either being locked inside of a small black room by the other party or being loved forcibly. In the worst scene, he was sent to the laboratory after exposing his fishtail. The next day, with a devastated heart and a small dark cloud floating above his head, he went to the palace banquet with a sickly expression on his face. The little dark cloud somehow appeared after he had inexplicably turned into a mermaid a few days ago. It couldn't be blown away or dispersed. Fortunately, the cloud could only be seen by him, and it didn't affect anything else. But the strange book that hit him on the head yesterday was just. At the thought of the book's contents, his heart felt very heavy. Inside the banquet hall, not far from him, several officers were whispering and chatting in a slightly sour tone. I heard that the front line has won another battle. When it's over, the major general is predicted to come back soon. This time, he's the commander. Chief for the front line. Will he be promoted again when he comes back? He's only 27 years old, and is already the youngest major general in the history of the empire. Promotion once again, TSK, his future is endless. He has a good fate, and there's also a father who commands the Third Army. His starting point is the end point for others. His fortune is good. The empire has been frequently involved in foreign wars in the last few years. Hearing the words, Major General Noah subconsciously stopped and turned his head to look at that group of people. I heard that His Majesty will send Prince Noah to the front line. I guess he wants to connect their families by marriage. Several people suddenly turned the topic to him, and Noah secretly gritted his teeth. It's rumored. Predicted. That His Majesty wants to marry into the Yu family, someone said. Isn't it? Another person disagreed, shook his head, and said, I heard that he's just going to the front line on behalf of the royal family to give condolences. Who knows? The man didn't care and then said, have you read today's Empire Morning Post? Tisk, it's almost lifting Commander Yu to the sky. Let me say that the battle is not over yet. Who knows how it will end? Noah held back his anger and looked at the newspaper in the man's hand. The headline on the front page of the newspaper was very big, occupying nearly half of the page. The Imperial Army won an all-round victory, and the shameless federal orcs were driven to the asteroid belt of the 8th galaxy. After reading the title, Noah's eyes became a little gloomy. After a while, he returned to his previous expression. An unknown light flashed in his beautiful pupils and he finally interrupted aloud. After listening to your words, you certainly think you will win more beautifully than Major General Yu if you go to the front line yourself. When several people heard Noah's words, they turned their backs to him. Their bodies were stiff, and their expressions were a bit awkward because they could attend the palace banquet. It meant their family background wasn't too bad, so they weren't afraid of anyone. Your Excellency, eavesdropping is unethical and immoral, one of them said, but after turning around, his voice got stuck before he finished speaking. The other people who turned around were stunned after seeing Inoa. The young man in front of them was wearing a platinum royal dress with golden braids on his chest. His face was delicate and fair, white and unspeakably beautiful, but his eyes were a little unpredictable. The broken blonde hair color, which was very similar to the emperor's, seemed to show his extraordinary identity. Not to mention, the cuffs and hem of his dress had a unique pattern embroidered with a golden thread which represented the imperial family. The hearts of several people were tight. Maybe this needs a footnote. I'm not sure what it means by hearts being tight, but I also think it would be better to keep the direct translation instead of paraphrasing it. Although they had never seen the person in front of them, no matter how stupid they were, they could guess his identity only by looking at his clothes and age. This was the little prince they had just mentioned. Damn it, didn't this guy never attend banquets? Why was he here today? The little prince had no real power, but if he reported what they just said to His Majesty and Major General Yu, thinking of this, the group of people suddenly burst into a cold sweat and nervously said, His Royal Highness. Inoa glanced at them and said slowly, eavesdropping is indeed immoral. However, discussing people's rights and wrongs behind their backs doesn't seem to be much better. Besides, it's not your place to talk about whether the royal family will marry or not. Several people were frightened and hurriedly apologized, but Inoa suddenly said, however, you have said something right. The battle isn't over yet. Who knows what the result will be? After he finished speaking, he smiled at them, but the smile didn't reach the bottom of his eyes. The group of people didn't dare to answer and just stood there, smiling. After all, they weren't only sour, but they also talked about the little prince going to the front line. Who knew if the little prince's words were insinuating them? Inoa didn't say any more, took a deep look at them, remembered their appearance, and turned to leave. Others might not know the final result of the war, but it wasn't necessarily the same for him. Inside the strange book that hit him on the head yesterday, he also saw many descriptions about the future. But from his point of view, most of these prophecies were extremely absurd. For example, in this war of national concern, although the empire was initially at a disadvantage, the situation began to reverse after Yuzhan was appointed as the front line commander. But the book also said, in the last battle, the imperial army suffered a crushing defeat. Yuzhan was seriously injured, and 100,000 mechas were completely damaged. The empire lost tens of thousands of mecha soldiers and had to negotiate with the Federation. Of course, Inoa didn't believe the contents of the book at first, but when he saw the front page title of the Empire Morning Post just now, he became confused. He had seen exactly the same headline in the book that hit him on the head yesterday. The Federal Army was pushed back to the asteroid belt early this morning. How could a book that appeared yesterday predict what happened today? In addition, the writer actually knew that he had inexplicably become a mermaid recently. He was very cautious. After becoming a mermaid, he hid it carefully, and nobody else could know. But that book had made it clear and even wrote about him and Yuzhan's fishtail play. Haha, so unreasonable. At the thought of this, Inoa was so angry that his ears became hot, and the small cloud above his head became gloomy. In fact, after thinking about it rationally, it was difficult for him to imagine that a person who was calm, self-sufficient, and rational like Yuzhan would turn into a beast when they went to bed as written in the book. Just as he couldn't imagine that he would try his best to seduce Yuzhan. But how could he explain that some of the information of the book was actually consistent with the happenings in reality? Thinking of those scenes, Inoa shuddered and walked out of the hall. Despite what those people had thought just now, he wasn't afraid of being sent to the front line and even wanted to go there early. He couldn't wait to verify one thing. If what was written in the book was true, it wouldn't be long before the Imperial Army was defeated miserably, and Yuzhan became seriously injured. And Inoa took a deep breath, not daring to think any further. After leaving the hall, he couldn't help looking back at the crowd. Inoa was affected by the content of the book. In a trance, he actually felt a little uneasy in this extravagant and peaceful atmosphere. Looking back, he glanced at the guard that was standing aside, waiting for him, and ordered, "Help me connect to the front line, command headquarters." Luya was his close guard, but he was a little embarrassed when he heard his order. After some hesitation, he said, "Your Highness, you have no permission." Noah froze and said, "Then call my father." Luya hurriedly dialed the internal line, and the other side answered quickly. However, it wasn't the emperor's voice but from the secretary beside the emperor. "Your Highness, His Majesty is in a meeting." The other party's tone was respectful. Noah furrowed his good-looking eyebrows and said, "Please help me tell my father that I agree to go to the front line." The secretary seemed a little surprised. He said, "Wait a minute," and returned after a while. "His Majesty said he knows. The warship is ready for you to set out as soon as possible." Noah. "Do you dare to say it wasn't ready long ago?" After hanging up, he told Luya, "Get ready to go to Blue Star." He wanted to go to the front line to meet Eugene in person and verify the plot. As for the book, it needed to be hidden perfectly. Its contents must never be seen by others, especially those sex scenes in the book. Listen to the full novel at famvetv.info, direct link in the description.